Greetings. This is David Kong, the founder and principal of DI Advisors. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering personal success. We're very fortunate to have Pat Pacious, the president and CEO of Choice Hotels and Resorts, with us today. Now, I know Choice had just acquired Radisson, so Pat is incredibly busy. I appreciate Pat taking time to join us. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Let's talk about your background first. You were in the U.S. Navy, and then you went to work for two very famous consulting firms prior to your career at Choice. Can you tell us how that experience helped you with your role at Choice?
Yeah, I was spent 6 years in the Navy, and that's really where I learned to lead people. And my management style, my leadership style, really was sort of formed in those 6 years. In the Navy, you are kind of thrown into an environment where day one, at the age of 21, I was leading 18 electricians, and I didn't know anything about electricity. So you learn to rely on the senior enlisted folks who've been doing it 20 years. You learn to listen to them, but you have to lead them. And so you're not always going to be an expert in your career, but you are going to be surrounded by experts and subject matter experts and people who you can learn from. And I learned that at a very early age in my career in the Navy. I was on my ship for 4 years, and I worked in the Pentagon for 2 years. And that's really where I learned a lot of strategy and sort of operations and large company problems and opportunities. And I really loved the strategy aspect of what I was doing. And so I really wanted to do that in the private sector. Went to business school, and then coming out of business school was fortunate enough to work at Arthur Andersen, which had just a fantastic reputation in the consulting field. And I learned a lot there about how to analyze business problems. I mean, they had a methodology for everything, whether it's product line profitability or supply chain issues, those types of things. And so I really kind of got a good taste of what the business world is like. And being in a consulting environment, you get the opportunity to work across functions. So everything from finance to supply chain to e-commerce to human capital and the like. And that was really a great training ground for what I do here at Choice on a daily basis. So the Navy kind of taught me my leadership style, and I think Arthur Andersen really taught me about how businesses truly work.
Yeah, you have a very diverse background, and no doubt that has helped you. I was also a consultant. I was also with Bearing Point, previously known as KPMG Consulting. And I know that's helped me in the way that I think about things and the way that I approach things. But talking about your role at Choice, you practically transformed the company. It's not the same company as you when you first went to work for it 17 years ago. What were the contributing factors to your success?
I think it's, kind of thinking about what is the company's mission. One thing that I learned early on about strategy is when you're formulating the strategy for a company or for anything, imagine the world without your company. And that helps you understand what role does it play. And for me, when I've always looked at where Choice plays, it's been in the right kind of spot for the franchisee who's looking for that more flexible set of brands that allow for more variability. That was always a key strength of Choice's when I arrived. But if you allow that to occur too much, then your brand standards erode. In the case of our technology at the time, we were way behind on a number of things. So it's great to have a principle of flexibility, but you have to set the boundaries. And I joined Choice at a time where we were going through massive unit growth, where our brands really increased their presence. But at the same time, take Comfort Inn, for instance, in the early 2000s, its brand equity began to erode because we accepted too many hotels into the brand. So we found ourselves, 5 years later, cleaning up the brand. And that's a tough conversation to have with franchisees. It's a tough conversation to have with your shareholders, but it was the right decision for the long-term health of that brand. So I think, when you really kind of enter into a company like I did at Choice, you really have to kind of understand what creates value. And that franchisee relationship was something that's always created value for us here at Choice. As I've become CEO, I've had the opportunity to add an extended stay brand, which has now expanded our extended stay footprint to almost 500 hotels. It was about 100 hotels when I took over. We've turned around the Comfort Inn brand and got that growing again. We've launched a brand called Everhome. We've launched another brand called Clarion Point. And again, all of those brand launches came from listening to our customer. And for a franchise company like ourselves, that franchisee is our key customer. The guest is also a customer, but it's ultimately the franchisee who's serving the guest. And our recent acquisition of Radisson has a similar flavor to it, sort of the next chapter, which is to really push further into the upscale segment for Choice Hotels, which is a nice adjacency for us. There's a lot of common franchisee ownership, a lot of guests that will move between our mid-scale and our upscale brands. So it just was the right fit for our current portfolio.
Yeah, well said. I've been a big fan and admirer of what you have done at Choice. No doubt your background in strategy has helped you tremendously, and your focus on the extended stay and now the upscale segment is going to round up the portfolio even more. And I like what you said about being focused on a customer.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the franchisees are your customers. But there's always a balance because they're paying guests that are also your customers.
Well, people always ask, who is our customer? Is it the guest or the franchisee? And I say it's both. It's a false choice to say one or the other. But it's, we look at the pandemic when there were no guests, we still had our franchisees looking to us and saying, I need your help.
Yeah.
So that tells you who is always going to be your customer. And that's the franchisees.
Well said. No doubt, despite your illustrious career, you've suffered some setbacks and disappointments, and we all have challenges we have to deal with. Tell me, what is your approach to challenges in general?
Well, I think you have to sort of see your way to the other side of them. When I hit a challenge, I'm trying to ask myself, is it a molehill or is it a mountain? That helps you understand how much time and effort you need to apply to it. Whose help you're going to need. If you're climbing a mountain, you might need some help along the way to get there. And so that's really the first thing, is to sort of assess it. And I always have used this, and we used to do this in consulting, is really, I always wanted to know who's been to the other side of the mountain and can help us. And consultants in that case, in many cases, have been to the other side. They've seen companies get through, companies that have struggled with growth, or companies that are looking to be more efficient. There's always somebody who's done it before that you can ask and say, what does it look like on the other side of the mountain? Because if you're at the bottom of that mountain, you've got to tell your team, this is how long it's going to take. This is how much effort we're going to have to put into it. But I think you have to sort of really be good at sizing your challenges, and then talk to people who've been on the other side of it. Because there's usually somebody who can give you some advice on not just what to do, but more importantly, what not to do. We all really learn from those mistakes, and there's no sense making the same mistakes somebody else made who faced a similar challenge. So that's been sort of my approach to it, and it's helped me a lot in my career. I have a lot of mentors who have been down the same path that I have, or may have run into the same challenges, but maybe in a different industry, or maybe outside of business. And those are usually things that when you set out to overcome a challenge, are really helpful in setting the path forward.
Yeah, no doubt. I like what you said about sizing up the challenge first, and then finding whether there are other people who have faced similar challenges and learn from them. I like that. Now, talk about challenges. The pandemic was the worst crisis the industry has ever faced. Talk about a challenge.
Yes.
It was immensely challenging. There was no one to go and ask.
Well, that's exactly right. There was no playbook, and everybody was in it together. So it wasn't like you're facing it and I'm not. I mean, the whole world was involved in something that nobody had any answers to. It's interesting. I relied a lot on my Navy training in that particularly those first couple of months, because in the military you're faced with a lot of challenges that nobody's ever faced before, and you have to take the initiative as a leader in many cases and kind of find your path forward. So when we all sat around the table and said, "Well, what do we do?" and I got a lot of blank stares back at me. As the leader, I said, "Well, I've got to lead. I have to set a course." I always tell my team, I'll say we're heading west. I don't know if we're heading, 260 or 290, but we're heading in that part of the compass, because just standing still is not good. It's not good for your people's morale. It's not good for the confidence level that you needed to retain during a period like that. And I think in times of uncertainty, people want to see action and movement. But it needs to be in a calm and controlled way. And so that was sort of my, I faced a lot of situations in the Navy when I was in charge of driving our ship around in a fleet exercise where, they throw problems at you that you've never seen before. And you have to kind of rely on your gut instinct because there is no training manual or playbook. And that was true of the pandemic. But along the way, I know, David, you and I had a few conversations. You were asking me, "Hey, what are you guys doing, with this situation, and how can we learn from each other?" And that was helpful too. A lot of people in our industry really sort of locked arms, banded together, passed around good ideas. And as information was starting to come into all of us, it became clear as to what customers wanted to see, what we were able to do in the travel sector. The fact that we were all communicating with each other, we were not in this alone. And I always look at it and say, no matter what challenges come our way, not just the hotel industry, but across the globe, countries worked together to develop these vaccines, to get them rolled out, to set the right cleanliness protocols in our industry. So it was a team effort, and I think that aspect of that sort of human connectivity, even though we're competitors in our industry, everybody kind of locked arms and said, "Let's figure this out together." And I think that was that's a really huge high point in my career, was the camaraderie that I experienced during that really dark time.
I agree with you. It was immensely gratifying that the teams at the hotels united together, the teams at the corporate office united together, the industry united together, and like you said, countries united together. It was really gratifying to see. It was wonderful. But I have to pay you kudos because I thought throughout the whole time, in spite of the immense adversity and uncertainty that we faced, you were calm, you were collected, you always led with courage and grace. It was just fantastic to see. Kudos to you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. I would say the same thing about you, but that's been kind of your entire leadership at Best Western was you exuded those attributes. So maybe I picked up a few things from you along the way.
Great to say that. Thank you. But let's talk about, now that we're older and wiser, we've learned a few things. And this show is really about collecting that wisdom from folks like us. What is your advice to your younger self?
I'm an introvert at heart. And people along the way always told me to speak up more in meetings. I read a book probably 15 years ago, maybe, called Quiet, which is really about introverts who've changed the world. Rosa Parks was an introvert. Mother Teresa was an introvert. The interesting thing about introverts is they prepare for everything. They over prepare. But when it comes time to perform, they're always kind of waiting to be invited to the party, waiting to be invited into the discussion. And, I learned probably 15, 17 years ago to be a little more vocal. And it's served me well because, everybody has something to contribute. And when I'm in a meeting today, if I see somebody is not contributing, but I know they're sort of anxious, sitting on the edge of their seat, I know they've got something to say. Sometimes it takes a leader to invite them in. But I wish earlier in my career I had been more probably just confident in my own abilities. I think the second thing is just the ability, and I preach this today, the ability to be what we call change agile, which means again, it's about, we're heading west, but I don't know what's going to happen year 2, 3, or 4. And I think a lot of young people want to plan their career out for the next 5 to 10 years. And you just don't know what's going to happen, what opportunities are going to come your way. And if you're change agile, you'll be willing to sort of say, I know I was thinking that my next step is to go into this department or to get this promotion or move to this company. But, be open to things that come your way that are a little off the path, because that certainly has been my career progression. I ran technology. I don't think there's another hotel CEO that has run technology. And that was a tough time when I was asked to do that right in the Great Recession. And I had to fly out to your neck of the woods in Phoenix every 2 weeks. I was out there and then back here in the Washington area where my family is. But I learned so much about the company, our industry, our franchisees, and myself doing that. But that was not something that was on my career path, was to go be a chief information officer. So I would add that really just being open to new challenges, even though it might not be on what you think is your career path, is some pretty wise advice I'd give myself.
Very, very good advice. I like that, especially the last one, where you want people to be more change agile. That's great advice, because sometimes people pigeonhole themselves, and we need to branch out and leave our comfort zone and try something different. And you round up your experience, you broaden your horizon.
Yeah,
that's really good. If you have a personal brand statement, what would that be?
I can't remember the quote. I think it's something to the effect of, there's a lot you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And I'm somebody, we just bought Radisson, and I can tell you I'm on my next I'm on to the next thing. There's an aspect to me, I think, that's more just sort of this humility and humble leadership around, it takes everybody to get something like this done. And at the end of the day, I don't care who gets the credit, because we all win. And I think it's a great leadership style too, because it allows everybody to sort of participate in success, as opposed to, because most big accomplishments are not the work of a single individual. They're the work of a team, or of people kind of helping each other along. And so that would probably be my personal brand statement.
That's a really good one. Sharing that credit and making other people feel like they've made a significant contribution. That's really good. It sets up a virtuous circle.
It does, and you use the word "we" more than I. That's and people appreciate it, particularly as a CEO now. The language that I use everybody hangs on every word, and so you have to be. And sometimes if you're speaking off the cuff, you just have to be careful. But if it comes natural to talk about yourself or your team as a we, as opposed to just yourself, I think it helps share that credit around, and that motivates people.
Oh, for sure. Now, Pat, among other accolades, you've been named the best CEO for women by Comparably. Choice has also been named the best employer for diversity and the best place to work for LGBTQ equality. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Tell us why diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, is important.
Well, it's really getting the best from the available people. And it doesn't really matter what background they come from. Great ideas are not reserved to certain ethnic groups or genders. So DE&I at the end of the day is about including as many people as you can, because those great ideas are going to come from someplace. I come from a very large family, 11 kids. And my mother was the first woman admitted to Georgetown's medical school. And she was a practicing physician her whole career. She worked her rear end off. And she was a bit of a, somebody who pushed up on the glass ceiling, but she was kind of a similar type, approach to life. She didn't want any accolades. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted her actions to sort of represent what she was able to do, and not because she was a woman or because of her background, but just who she was personally. And so I've always sort of looked at that and said, whether you're an African American, Hispanic, female, what we're all looking for are people who can bring great ideas, bring the right work ethic, and contribute to everybody's success. And that's what a lot of our DE&I efforts are designed to do, is to invite more people into our industry. I mean, our industry is very underrepresented when it comes to leadership. I mentioned technology. Technology, there's very few African Americans in technology. We're trying to get more women into technology, but there's a lot of effort that's going on across our industry and across just functional areas like technology, for instance, where the door is being opened to more people who didn't traditionally come to our industry. And we're doing a lot on that front to encourage it. Choice is kind of unique. We've always had, for I think about 17 years now, we have had a diversity committee of our board of directors. It was started by Barbara Bainham, who was the daughter of our founder. And, she was on our board for many years, but our company has always been focused on it as a key driver for the future of our business. And as we all know, our customer base is getting more diverse, our employee base is getting more diverse. So it is really sort of answering the call as our society is changing to move the people who have the best ideas, regardless of their background, into more leadership roles.
That's very well said. Thank you for that. Now, related, I know you recently appointed a vice president of environmental, social, and governance, ESG. Tell us your objectives.
Yeah, so Choice is a company that has a great story to tell, but we need to do a better job of telling that story. So probably about 8 months ago, I said to myself, I need on our team a full-time resource. We've been doing the ESG functions off the side of people's desks. It was a collateral duty for many. But I said, if we're going to be really focused on this and drive it forward, it makes sense to pick a singular leader. Megan Brummagem, who ran our Comfort brand and then ran all of our mid-scale brands for us, she has a passion for it. She is very articulate, a great communicator, but most importantly, she understands hotel operations. She understands our franchisees. And so as we start talking about setting goals, she knows who to call at the Comfort Inn in Ocala, Florida, and say, is this going to work? What are your challenges? And the beauty of what's been happening, particularly on the environmental side in the last, call it 5 to 10 years, when you used to say environmental before, it meant higher cost for owners. Now the technology and the materials that we're able to use, it doesn't always mean higher cost. In fact, it can mean lower cost. And when we look at our hotels that are being built today, low irrigation landscaping, saltwater pools, the lights sensors that turn the lights off when guests leave the room, all of that technology is available today at a reasonable price point, and the benefit is it saves on utility costs. So it's a nice convergence that we're seeing. And Megan has that background. She rolled out brand programs for years, and so she's been really focused on that. And then I think on the S side and the G side, those are also areas that Choice has a lot to tell, and it's important now. Our shareholders want to know more about it. More and more, our guests want to know more about it. And certainly our franchisees do as well. So really focusing on those three key stakeholders is what Megan's job is going to be. And it is a full-time job. I think, as you know, the SEC is now looking at requiring public companies to disclose these things. So it's gone beyond just a nice to have or a nice to do and more of a requirement. And I just think as we look out in the next 5 to 10 years, the role of an ESG leader in companies is going to become a necessity, not a nice to have. And so I wanted to get a little ahead of the game by appointing Megan to that role. And as I said, we have a great story to tell, but we also have a long way to go on all three of those fronts.
Yeah, well, you definitely have a story to tell, and you're certainly making a commitment and appointing a vice president to spearhead the effort. Congratulations to you. Let's go back to the topic that's on a lot of people's mind, which is the lack of women and minorities in executive leadership positions. What do you think about the situation, and what could be done about it?
Well, it's clearly if you look at women owners of hotels, that's clearly an area where they are underrepresented as outright owners. This is an area that Choice has been focused on for a number of years. We actually have a development team that is a dedicated group of franchise salespeople focused just on underrepresented communities. So it's female, it is Hispanic and African American owners, Native American owners, veterans. So we have a team that's been at this for about 15 years. I think to date, they probably sold about 300 franchises over that time. And so the focus has been on, well, how do we make that not 300, but 3,000? I mean, how do we really step on the gas? And everybody, luckily, in our industry is really trying to do that. The biggest challenge for most underrepresented minorities and women in particular is getting access to capital. So we can incent franchise sales, but as you know, David, it costs money to build hotels, and it requires both equity and lending. And that's where the capital markets are really going to need to change, so that they're not always saying, well, show me your 10 years of investing history, because a new female entrepreneur or African American entrepreneur doesn't have that history. But as people look back on history and say, well, how did people who had no experience get that experience? It was they had friends. They had somebody who was willing to support them or back them. And we need to really focus on that as an industry, is to get those networks together. If you look at the Asian Indian community here in the United States, and that's a perfect example where through their social connections, they have helped each other become very successful entrepreneurs. I know our African American Franchisee Association points to them and says, that's what we want. We want the networks. We want the opportunities to raise our ability to participate more in hotel ownership. Shifting to the corporate side, it is certainly an area that I know we're focused on. I know all of our competitors are focused on, is to get more women and minorities into leadership roles. What I'm encouraged by is when I look at our vice president level, which is really the next level down from the folks that report to me, we have a significant number of minorities and women in those roles. So I would expect is in the next 5 years, as those of us at the top start to age out a little bit, the succession plans are much more diverse than they were 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm encouraged by that as well, because these are qualified people who are getting a world of experience in what they're doing today and are going to be ready to step into these leadership roles here in the next 3 to 5 years.
That's wonderful. And thank you for cultivating the next generation of leaders with so many women and minorities represented. Nice job. Time flies when you're having fun. We're getting close to the end of the show. Let's end with your advice to women and minorities.
Well, I think like anybody, having a mentor that you can connect with, and I know people talk about mentorship programs, and the most successful mentorships are they're not programs. They are a relationship that takes some courage to ask for. It takes time to work on it. But I would encourage those that aspire to higher levels in their companies, and mentors don't have to be inside your company, but really seek out people who can provide you the advice on how to navigate situations, how to ask for more, when to raise your hand and say, I mean, we're doing it now. We're in the middle of an acquisition. There are people on my team who are raising their hand and saying, I'd like to do more. And every leader wants to hear that. So I would encourage that. And then I think the other thing, David, is really important is make sure you know what you're asking for. To be a CEO of a public company, a global company, you've done this. There's a lot of travel involved. There's a lot of constituencies you have to please. There's a lot of stress that these jobs entail. And so, having that and your family and your customers, there's a lot of people to please. So just make sure that as you aspire to these roles, you have a good sense of what it is you're asking for. And then one thing that's been very helpful to me is make sure you're communicating with your partner, your family about what the future holds if you take on that new role, so that they know what to expect too. If you're going to be spending more time at work or on an airplane or, in Europe or the Middle East, they need to know that that's part of the bargain. Because I've seen a lot of leaders say they want something, and then when they realize what that really entails, they're like, oh, maybe I don't want that. So I think it's really interesting to think about all we've gone through with the pandemic. A lot of people are kind of recentering their lives. So make sure as you aspire to new roles, you understand what's required of you on the personal front. We all understand what's required at the job level, but a lot of these more senior roles take on a bigger toll personally, and you have to be prepared for it yourself as well as your family and friends.
Yeah, for the longest time, the hotel industry has a very, very high divorce rate. It's just the toll that the work has on personal life. It's just very hard, like you said.
Yeah. The Navy was the same way, David. I mean, you're gone for 6 months and you're in different parts of the world, high stress environment. It's not a career that is helpful for weak marriages, I can tell you that. And the hotel space, you're right. There's a lot of travel involved, so people need to be comfortable with that.
I really like your advice on speaking up, expressing that you want to contribute, and to your earlier point about sometimes being an introvert. I'm an introvert myself. I know exactly what you're talking about. You're probably the most well prepared in the group, but you're the last person to speak because you're just more comfortable listening to other people. But volunteering to contribute like that is really important when you're climbing the ladder, because that's how you advocate for yourself. You make an impression at the meeting. That's what you need to do.
Yep.
Very good advice. Well, thank you so much, Pat. I really appreciate taking the time. And I know this is really busy time for you, so I'm particularly grateful. And for the audience that enjoyed the show and enjoyed the advice that you received from Pat Pacious, we have other similar interviews on our website, biadvisors.org. We hope to see you there. Thanks again, Pat.
Thanks, David. Take care.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye.